Hello, and welcome to the orientation for fiscal year 2027 grantees of the Maryland Heritage Areas Program. My name is Ariane Hofstad, and I am the program director. And I'd like to start by congratulating you on your award during what was a particularly competitive year. This orientation is mandatory for all grantees and is designed to help you successfully steward the state funds you're about to receive. Please watch this video in its entirety, including the instructions at the end on how to take a short mandatory quiz. Four of my colleagues will also be presenting today: Andrew Arvizu and Martha Waldron, who serve as program officers of the Maryland Heritage Areas Program, as well as project monitors to approved grantees, and Sabrina Roundtree and Caitlin Swaim, who are assistant grants managers for the Maryland Historical Trust. And because the Maryland Heritage Areas Program is housed administratively within the Maryland Historical Trust, which is also referred to as MHT, they work closely with us primarily on processing grant agreements and payments. Today's agenda will highlight the most important items and documents you need to be aware of. Everything we are presenting is also available in the fiscal year 2027 grants manual that can be accessed online at MHT's website at mht.maryland.gov under the Resources for Grantees section of the Maryland Heritage Areas Program Project Grants webpage. And now I will turn it over to Andrew, who will be starting things off by talking about how to receive your first payment.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Arvizu, and I am one of two program officers for the Maryland Heritage Areas Program. I will also serve as the project monitor for about half of this year's grantees. I will start by talking about the 4 steps you need to complete to receive your first payment. The first requirement is the project summary sheet. This is due August 31st, 2026, and should be completed online under your account in the grants portal. Once that is completed, staff can start generating your grant agreement, which will be sent for signature via email using Adobe Sign to the person you indicated in your project summary sheet as the authorized signatory for your organization. We anticipate starting to generate grant agreements as early as September 2026. The grant agreement is considered executed once all parties have signed. Your first payment of 50% of your grant award will be sent approximately 30 days after the grant agreement has been executed. We highly recommend signing up for electronic payment. Instructions for this will be shared later in this presentation. I'd now like to provide a few more details about your project summary sheet. There are a few items related to the project summary sheet that we wanted to make you aware of. At the top of the sheet, you will need to check a box certifying that you have completed this mandatory orientation and subsequent short quiz. So it is very important that you do these before completing your project summary sheet. Please review the pre-populated items in the project summary sheet to ensure they are listed correctly. These will include the name of your organization and project contact, grant and match award amounts, project start and end dates, and the name, title, email of authorized person that will be signing your grant agreement. For capital projects, you will also be asked to certify if your organization owns the property where the project will be taking place, and if not, you will need to upload a property consent letter from the owner to the project summary sheet form. Instructions on how to complete that letter can be found under Appendix H, Property Owner Consent, in the fiscal year 2027 grant guidelines that can be accessed on the MHT's website at mht.maryland.gov under the Resources for Grantees section of the Maryland Heritage Areas Program Project Grants webpage. There is also a section in the project summary sheet for you to tell us if there have been any changes to your project contact, timetable, budget, and/or scope of work. The project summary sheet will also note if your project has any easement and/or preservation requirements or special conditions that must be met before you can proceed. There will be more information on this later in the presentation. There is also a checkbox for you to indicate if you anticipate having any single procurements that are more than $50,000. The project summary sheet also includes instructions for disabling reviewer access of the local heritage area director. Now that your grant has been approved, this is no longer needed, and we ask that you do this at this time if you have not already. Each grantee must review and submit the project summary sheet, even if there are not changes that need to be made. The sooner you return it, the earlier your grant agreement will be generated, and you will get your first payment. And now I will turn things over to Caitlin, who will talk about your grant agreement.
Thank you, Andrew. My name is Caitlin Swaim, and I am an Assistant Grants Manager for the Maryland Historical Trust that works closely with the Maryland Heritage Areas Program. I'll be talking a bit more about your grant agreement. It's important to note that it is a legal contract that should be read by staff members who will be involved in administering the grant. Pay close attention to the sections that outline your scope of work, budget, match requirement if you have any easement or preservation requirements before starting work, and your timetable for completion, which includes your start date, mid-project report due date, project end date, and final report due date. The grant agreement must be signed by someone who is legally authorized by your organization to enter into contracts. For nonprofits, this will most likely be the director, president of the grantees board, an elected officer of the grantees board, or the executive director, president, or equivalent position that has been appointed and authorized by the grantee's bylaws. For local, state, and federal agencies and/or jurisdictions, authorized individuals may include, but are not limited to, city managers, mayors, city administrators, commissioner presidents, agency heads, and town administrators. If you're not sure who is legally authorized, check your organizational bylaws. If it's not clear that the representative has the legal authority to sign this agreement on behalf of the grantee, additional documentation will be required. At the time you are signing your grant agreement, your organization must be in good standing with the State Department of Taxation and Assessments, SDAT. Grant agreements won't be sent to your organization for a signature, and payments will not be issued if you're not in good standing with SDAT. It's usually an easy fix, such as paying an outstanding fee or submitting necessary paperwork that you'll likely be able to do online by going to www.dat.maryland.gov and selecting Online Services from the menu on the left and clicking Search the Business Database in the left sidebar. And now I'll be talking about your project budget and scope of work. The project budget section outlined in your grant agreement is not itemized line by line. Instead, it shows summary amounts of your grant award and match requirement. If you indicated in the budget you submitted with your application that you will also have other project costs outside of the grant and match, those will not be included in your grant agreement. All grantees are encouraged to devise their own consistent method, i.e. Excel spreadsheet, for tracking expenses of approved budget items, which include grant and match funds, and any other project costs that are being paid for with non-state funds. Summaries of these funds will need to be reported when requesting a payment and submitting your reports, and all detailed financial documentation is required to be kept for up to 3 years after your final report has been submitted. Your scope of work is based on the detailed budget you submitted with your application and is a narrative description of the approved expenses that you can pay for using grant and/or matching funds. Please review the list of items in your scope of work carefully. Any expenses in your original application that were deemed ineligible during the review process will not be included, and this may require you to revise your project. If you have questions about this scope of work, be in touch with your assigned project monitor to discuss. You have the flexibility to spend any amount on any approved line item listed in your scope of work without getting prior approval, as long as you do not exceed approved grant and match amounts. Items that are not covered by grant funds include anything that's not listed in your scope of work, as well as alcohol, operating, overhead costs, exception for nonprofits with non-capital projects that have been approved for up to 15% indirect costs. Marketing can be used for match. Staff salaries for time spent on the project, exception for contractors hired to work on project. And now Martha will discuss the types of allowed matching funds, easement and preservation requirements, and acknowledgement language.
Thank you, Caitlin. Hello, everyone. My name is Martha Waldron, and I am one of 2 program officers for the Maryland Heritage Areas program. I will also serve as the project monitor for about half of this year's grantees. Grantees can fulfill the match requirement using any combination of cash and in-kind contributions. This includes staff and volunteer time for work directly related to the project, including from your own organization and partner organizations, donated or discounted professional services and materials, and cash purchases and expenditures that were paid for using non-state funds. Other project costs are everything else above the required 1-to-1 match. They do not count towards the match, but as Caitlin mentioned, they should be tracked and reported if they are contributing to your project. And now I will talk a bit more about the easement and preservation requirements that were mentioned earlier. All projects receiving funding from the state of Maryland must be reviewed to assess the effects on the project on National Register and National Register eligible historic properties. This is required by federal and state law. If your capital or non-capital project involves disturbance to grounds or historic property, the MHT compliance and easement teams have already reviewed your project as described in your application. Their job is to identify historic properties potentially affected, assess the project's effects on historic properties, including archaeological, and seek ways to avoid, minimize, or mitigate any adverse effects. If the MHT compliance and/or easement staff determine that additional review or compliance is required for your project, these are called easement and preservation requirements. These requirements will be listed in your grant agreement and in your project summary sheet and will generally fall into one of 3 categories. 1, an easement preservation agreement is required. 2, an easement/preservation agreement is either satisfactory. Number 2, an existing easement/preservation agreement is either satisfactory or needs to be modified. Or number 3, special conditions are required. These almost always require additional coordination with MHT, such as terrestrial archaeological investigations or work in cemeteries. These requirements protect against changes or work that are inconsistent with the preservation of the property. The state has the legal authority and responsibility to enforce any preservation easements through inspections and review and approval of changes. If these terms are not upheld by you, the grantee, there could be penalties such as reversal of unapproved work, your grant being canceled, and/or the possibility that you would be asked to return any disbursed funds. In most cases, you are not permitted to begin work on your project until these requirements have been satisfied. Please pay close attention to what the requirements are now so you don't have to make changes later. If you start work on your project without approvals in place, you risk forfeiting your grant. If additional information was requested or requirements were listed, do not begin work on your project until the proposed work has been approved by MHT. If additional information is required, it typically will include more detailed maps, site plans, description of work methods, etc., that were not initially included in your project application. If your project has easement or preservation requirements, you will be contacted by the MHT compliance and/or easement staff or you can proactively reach out to them. More information, including contact information, can be found on MHT's website at mht.maryland.gov under the Project Review and Planning and Protection drop-down menus. Your project summary sheet and grant agreement will outline whether or not any easement or preservation requirements have been assigned. The majority of projects will not have any easement or preservation requirements, which means MHT's compliance team does not need any additional information about your project, and you may proceed with the project. However, if your project scope changes, they may need to review those changes. And now I'd like to discuss how to properly acknowledge your grant. Grantees must acknowledge MHAA's support via our logo and/or the program's acknowledgement statement, which reads, "This project has been financed in part with state funds from the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority, but does not necessarily reflect its views or policies." Acknowledgement requirements, including this statement, can also be found in your grant agreement under Exhibit A, Terms and Conditions, in the section titled Grantees Support Acknowledgements. The grantee and any consultant hired by the grantee must acknowledge MHAA at public events, including interviews, groundbreaking ceremonies, dedication, media events, and in materials like press releases, brochures, video productions, installation of exhibits, signage, or web pages, for example. Prior to production of such materials, you should allow the Maryland Heritage Areas program staff to review and approve materials stated above at least 2 weeks in advance. MHAA's logo can be accessed online at MHT website at mht.maryland.gov under the Resources for Grantees section of the Maryland Heritage Areas Program Project Grants webpage. You are also encouraged to acknowledge your local heritage area by name and logo. You can reach out to them directly for their logo file. And now, Andrew will go over project timetables, reporting, and amendments.
I'm going to provide a bit more detail about the timetable and corresponding reports that were mentioned earlier. Each grant is given approximately 2 years to complete their project. All projects start on the same day. For fiscal year 2027, this is July 9th, 2026, which is the day projects were approved by the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority. There are 2 main types of reports that you will be asked to complete during your grant period. They are the mid-project report and the final report. The mid-project report is due approximately halfway through your grant period, or around the 1-year mark. The final report is due at the very end and is usually approximately 2 months after your project end date, which is the date by which you should have completed all of your project activities and spent all of your grant and match funds. All reports should be submitted online under your account in the grants portal. And now I will share information on how to request an amendment if you need to make adjustments to your project timetable or scope of work. We understand that sometimes projects do not go as expected. If you need to request an amendment to your project timetable and/or scope of work, you may do so by emailing your project monitor. Amendments allow grantees to extend mid-project or final project report due dates, extend overall project end date, adjust the scope of work, add or remove budget line items. When you contact your project monitor, be prepared to provide information about the status of your project and explain why you need the amendment and what changes to the timetable and/or scope of work you would like to request. Minor amendments, such as extending your timetable, can be approved by staff, but more substantive changes, such as additions to your scope of work, need to be approved by the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority at their next scheduled meeting. Once approved, you will receive an email asking you to confirm the new terms of your grant. And now I will turn it over to Ariane, who will explain our procurement procedures.
Thank you, Andrew. When using grant and match funds, all grantees are expected to follow certain procurement guidelines to ensure that the costs of goods and services obtained to carry out the project are reasonable and customary for the type of work performed and materials purchased. For returning grantees, it's important to note that our policy has been revised starting in fiscal year 2027. The spending threshold for required written bids has increased from $10,000 to $50,000. Nonprofit organizations with single purchases that are more than $5,000 but no more than $50,000 are strongly encouraged to obtain oral or written bids from at least 2 vendors for any goods and services. For purchases more than $50,000, written bids from at least 3 vendors must be obtained. And government organizations should follow their own normal procedures and must also be able to document that applicable procurement procedures were followed. When bids are obtained, grant recipients are not required to select the lowest bid, but must be able to provide documentation on why a vendor other than the low bidder was selected and what criteria other than the most favorable bid price were considered. Sole source procurement of goods and services should not be utilized unless the grantee can demonstrate that competitive procurement is impractical because only one product or service vendor can meet specific project requirements. Sole source expenditures must also be reasonable and customary for the type of goods and services being obtained. Grantees using sole source procurement should record their justification in writing and keep it with their documentation. You must document your bid process and will be asked to provide an update in your mid-project report and summary of results in your final report. In addition, you will be asked to affirm in the final report via a checkbox and signature that for procurements more than $50,000, you obtained and reviewed written bids from at least 3 vendors and retained documentation in your records. You should retain these documents for 3 years after your final report has been submitted, in case they are requested by MHT or Maryland Heritage Area Program staff. Sabrina will now review payments as well as required financial documentation and record retention policies.
Thank you, Ariane. My name is Sabrina Roundtree, and I am an assistant grant manager for the Maryland Historical Trust, and I also work closely with the Maryland Heritage Areas Program. Your payment distributions, grantees typically receive 3 payments. You will receive the first 50% of your award upfront after signing your grant agreement. The exception for this is if you have an easement or preservation requirements that need to be completed first. In that case, your payment will be held until those are done. Your second payment is up to 25% of your award, can be requested at the mid-project point by submitting your mid-project report and corresponding requests for payment form that can be found online under your account in the grants portal. The request for payment is the second tab or page 2 of your mid-project report. To qualify for a second payment, you must have spent approximately 50% of your grant and match funds, submitted a satisfactory mid-project report that has been approved by your project monitor, and shown an adequate progress on the project. If you aren't ready to request the funds at the time of your mid-project report, you can leave the payment request amount field of the request for payment form blank. If you would like to request your second payment at a future time, once you have expended approximately 50% of your total project costs, Just let your project monitor know, and they can reopen the report for you to resubmit. Alternatively, you can combine the second and third payments into one payment at the end of the project. Your third and final payment is usually the remaining balance of the grant. It is considered reimbursable because it is paid after you have completed your project, spent all of the grant and match funds, and submitted a satisfactory final report. This includes submitting evidence that all deliverables in your scope of work were completed, photos, copies of reports, etc., and having your project monitor approve your report. And the request for payment forms that are found in both the mid-project and final reports, you are not required to report against individual budget line items. Instead, you will be asked to provide summary totals of the total grant funds expended to date, the total match funds expended to date, and the total other project costs expended to date, non-state funds only. The request for payment form must be signed electronically, and you must check a box certifying that you have incurred the grant expenditures and the information you provided is correct. The expenditures you report must align with your approved expenses that are spelled out in your scope of work. We recommend checking your SDAT status prior to submitting a request for payment at www.dat.maryland.gov by going to online services and clicking search the business database in the left sidebar. If you are not in good standing, i.e. you owe money to the state or paperwork has lapsed, you risk having your grant payment held by the comptroller's office until your issue is resolved. And lastly, we strongly suggest signing up for direct deposit with the Office of the Comptroller of Maryland. You will receive your grant funds faster. You can do this by going to www.marylandtaxes.gov/divisions/EFT-program.php or calling 410-296-7813 and select option 3 or email gadcsc@marylandtaxes.gov. Next, I'm going to talk about financial documentation record retention requirements. Financial documentation is written records of all grant and match expenditures that align with your approved scope of work. They should show what was purchased or funded, when it was purchased, or when the work was completed and how much it costs. This can be in the form of invoices, receipts, bids, vouchers, or in contracts from vendors. For proof of expenditures for personnel expenses serving as match, QuickBooks and other accounting systems printouts are acceptable, as well as staff timesheets, pay stubs, and volunteer time logs, etc. For volunteers, the log you create should include the name of the person, a brief description of the work completed, date they worked, and the exact number of hours. To calculate the rate of service, you can multiply the number of hours by $36.51, which is the 2005 hourly value of volunteer time issued by the independent sector. For procurements of more than $50,000, you should retain the 3 required bids that were mentioned earlier, along with the documentation of your selection process and why a vendor was selected, i.e. selection criteria. For sole source procurements, you should retain a written justification that explains why only one product or service vendor can meet specific project requirements and that expenditure were reasonable and customary to the goods and services obtained. For donated or discounted goods, services, and or equipment, aka in kind, you need to have a written account of the value of the donation that must be recorded at the time of acceptance. This can be in the form of a signed voucher, invoice, or other official documentation and should reflect reasonable market rate costs. For property acquisition, you should retain a copy of the wire documentation, proof of title work, insurance, and the purchase agreement. We strongly encourage you to devise your own consistent method, i.e. an Excel worksheet, for tracking the expenses associated with the list of items and the approved scope of work that correspond with your documentation. Keep records as you go while doing your project. Don't wait until the end. For example, daily timesheets for staff and volunteer time. Every grantee is required to retain their financial documentation for up to 3 years after the final report submission date and be prepared to provide them upon request at any time during your grant period or for 3 years after. Lastly, I would like to note that we are only requiring documentation for expenditures, but for your standard accounting best practice, we also recommend that you keep proof of payment, such as canceled checks and credit card statements, but this payment info will not be requested. I am going to talk to you about our financial spot check policy. This is a way for the program to verify that grantees are keeping accurate records of their grant and match funds, and one of the times that grantees are required to submit the financial documentation. For returning grantees, it is important to note that our policy has been revised starting in fiscal year 2027. Our revised policy now states that a minimum of 7 grantees will be selected for financial spot check each fiscal year. The selection criteria for financial spot check participants include random selection, risk assessment, materiality, and, if applicable, prior compliance. More specifically, a random selection of at least 2 non-capital project grants under $50,000 will be made. This may include first-time grantees or returning grantees. A random selection of at least 2 capital project grants over $50,000 will also be made. Like non-capital participants, this may also include first-time grantees or returning grantees. And finally, at least 3 management grants to heritage area management entities will be selected. MHT and MHAA staff also reserve the right to select other grantees for financial spot check at any time during the grant timetable if concerns regarding risk, materiality, or previous compliance arise. Participants will be notified if they have been selected for financial spot check by me or another member of MHT's grant staff near their project end date or upon receipt of their final report. If selected, grantees need to provide detailed financial documentation and a financial spot check expense form of their grant and match expenses. The financial spot check expense form is new this year. It is only required for financial spot check participants and is in an Excel spreadsheet that lists all the required all of the approved project expenditures, grant and match funds that are listed in your scope of work. The financial spot check expense form will be provided by grantees by MHT or MHAA staff at the time of notification. Materials should be submitted electronically via email to me at Sabrina.Roundtree, SABRINA.ROUNDTREE @maryland.gov. These are in addition to your final report that is to be submitted under your account in the grants portal. Your final report will not be approved until your financial spot check is completed successfully. For grantees that are selected for a financial spot check, bid documents and sole source justification must be included in the financial documentation provided. Detailed instructions for organizations in submitting financial spot check material can be found on page 20 of the grants manual, which can be accessed online at the MHT's website, mht.maryland.gov, under the Resources for Grantees section of the Maryland Heritage Area Programs Project Grants webpage. Key steps for grantees selected for financial spot check include entering actual expenditure amounts in the financial spot check expense form for grant funds, match, and other project costs, non-state funds. Verifying that the line items listed in the financial spot check expense form match your approved expenses and financial records. And saving financial documents electronically in an organized manner that aligns with the line items in your scope of work and corresponding financial spot check expense form. All of the documentation you provide must add up exactly to the amount shown for each corresponding line item in the financial spot check expense form. Incomplete financial spot check submissions will be returned with revision requests. Failure to submit a satisfactory final report or the financial documentations required is a default under the grant agreement that may result in the cancellation of the grant and or your repayment in dispersed grant funds. And now I'll return it over to Ariane.
Thank you, Sabrina. We have come to the end of the orientation. Thank you for listening to this session. We realize it is a lot to retain in one sitting and hope you will refer to these slides as needed. They can be accessed online at MHT's website at mht.maryland.gov under the Resources for Grantees section of the Maryland Heritage Areas Program Project Grants webpage. There is one final task you must complete before moving forward with your grant award, and that is to take a short quiz, only 6 questions, that certifies to us that you have completed this mandatory orientation session and retained the pertinent information needed to successfully steward your state grant. The quiz can be accessed online at MHT's website at mht.maryland.gov under the Resources for Grantees section of the Maryland Heritage Areas Program Project Grants webpage as well. Please complete the quiz by August 31st, 2026, and you can submit it as many times as needed until you reach 100%. On behalf of all of us presenting today, thank you for your time. The work that you are doing to preserve and promote Maryland's diverse heritage is important and vital in our goal to uplift and share the important stories and historic and natural places with thousands of visitors. Your projects will not only showcase how amazing Maryland is, but also boost the local economies of communities throughout the entire state. Thank you once again. Good luck with your projects, and please do not hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. We can be reached at Ariane Hofstede, ARIANE.HOFSTEDE STEDT@maryland.gov. And my number is 410-697-9686. Or for contacting Andrew Arvizu, ANDREW.ARVIZU@maryland.gov, or by calling 410-697-9514, or contacting Martha Waldron at MARTHA.WALDRON@maryland.gov, or calling 410-697-9555. Thank you, and best of luck with your projects.